Hello and welcome to another Walking Dead video, and today we're reviewing Fear the Walking Dead Season 7, Episode 11, Ofelia. So there will be some slight spoilers when I talk about this because I want to talk about parts of this episode, so be warned, but I'm not going to do a breakdown of each part of the episode, so there will be slight spoilers but not mega spoilers. Let's jump right into this review. So this episode is a Daniel episode, and the plot of this episode is about Daniel trying to find Ofelia, because Ophelia's not on the sub, so where could she be? And it's about West and Luciana with Daniel trying to get him to go back to the sub. So with that little description, it's obvious that we have another crazy Daniel episode. I'm not a fan of crazy Daniel. It's just like they didn't know what to do with Daniel, so they gave him Alzheimer's or dementia, one of those two things, and I was just like, oh, it's kind of a bit annoying, but it's okay, because there are some massive bonuses because of this episode. So because we get kind of senile Daniel, we get more of that CRA Daniel we got, where he used to do like this cool CIA stuff at the start of the show in season 1, 2 and 3. We get some of those like glimpses of like greatness that Daniel used to be, because apparently thinking that Ofelia is alive clarifies his brain and makes him clear and focuses him so he can be more like his past self, which is quite cool. So we do get some Daniel pretending to be down, just taking people out. I thought it was cool. We got some brutal Daniel again. We never got like season 1, season 2, season 3, maybe season 1, season 2 levels of Daniel is brutal, which is sad. It was a nullified Daniel. So Daniel was okay, minus his senile storyline they gave for some reason, which was quite annoying. But another positive is that Luciana finally does something. This almost feels like a Luciana episode. You could almost count it as a Luciana episode, just because of how prominent she is in this episode, how important she is to the story, and how she's basically co-starring this with Daniel. It's just what it feels like, just because what Daniel's story is, Luciana is connected. For some reason, they've connected those two characters to have this like kind of family relationship. That's cool and all, and I really like that idea. They're doing that with Daniel, where he has a new surrogate daughter, and it's between Luciana, because he does say they're basically family at some point in this episode. However, there are some issues with this. Did they try to do that with Charlie in season 6, and now they've seemed to have dropped it and replaced Charlie with Luciana, which is annoying, because that means Luciana's a second choice for a plot line. And another thing is that we've had zero character development between these two characters. We have zero bonding or screen time. It's just at the start of this episode, they are suddenly close together, where in previous seasons, they barely had any shots together. They barely shared any scenes. And now they're meant to be believable that they are both have this close bond, that Luciana's looking after Daniel. It'd be cool if we saw more of this in other episodes. It's a shame though, because these characters barely get in any other episodes, so all their character development and all their bonding has happened off screen. So we pick up this episode with Luciana and Daniel very close together, when in previous seasons I'm pretty sure they talked to each other only once or twice, just because Luciana was introduced with Nick after Daniel left in season 2. Daniel didn't come back. They didn't even meet until like season 5, I think. That's when they first ever met, and they had 1 or 2 shots together in season 6, and now they're meant to be buddies and very close relatives and like very close in this episode. It's like, it's cool and all, I like the idea, and I like it, but the execution to get there is just lacking. But now let's move on to other parts of this episode, and I want to talk about West, because I feel like it was in this episode just to be there. It was quite useless. I didn't like him. He wasn't fun. He wasn't entertaining. All he did was take away from the core part of this episode, which was this bond between Luciana and Daniel being slightly built upon until they say they're family. And that's cool and all. I just do feel like that's a bit undeserved, because there's no building up. It's like, what if Rick and Daryl just randomly, after they barely met, Rick's like, you're my brother. That's what it kind of felt like when they did this in this episode with Luciana and Daniel. But moving back to West, he was just there a lot of the time, just being a bit of an ass, telling Luciana to leave Daniel, stuff like that. I didn't like him. He was annoying. He doesn't add anything to the story. He's just there to be there because they need to do something with West. I didn't like that. Another thing I didn't like is I'm starting to get a bit bored of the orange tint. I thought it was really cool to show the fallout at first, but now it's got to the point where I'm like, I've gone over that, like, oh, it looks cool, looks like the game Fallout. But no, now it's just, oh, it's just boring because now they got this orange tint on the screen. It's a bit of an eyesore. I just didn't like it. It's just kind of annoying at this point. It also doesn't help that in the earlier episodes, this orange or green tint was meant to symbolise there's radiation, you have to wear a mask. But now they're like, they check a little thing on the hip, and they're like, oh no, we're fine, we can just take it off all the time. And you're like, no, because previous episodes established that when we see this, it's an indicator, a visual indicator, that that has to happen. But now they are ignoring what they've showed us in the show in the start of the season 2. They're going to take off their mask because they can. And you're like, oh, it's annoying. And there are some really annoying moments in here because you see Daniel fight a radiation burned walker and it's just fine. When in the previous episode, Charlie did the same and now she's got radiation sickness. You're like, oh, come on. You have different laws for different characters now. I didn't like that. If you're expecting an action episode, there's only like 1 or 2 really action like orientated scenes with Daniel with a knife just doing a bit of a scuffle. It's very focused on dialogue and character building and relationship between Luciana and Daniel. And even though Daniel is the focus of the episode, by the end of the episode, I feel like Luciana did more character development, and I really liked Luciana by the end of this episode because she has something hard to do, and I will talk about it later, but I really liked that, what they did. The pacing is really good. This is the best paced episode in such a long time. I really like the pacing because it moves at a good speed. You have characters you care about, so you don't feel like it's dragging, and by the time it ends, you want more. And I'm sad this episode ended because I wanted way more than I got when watching this, because the pacing was great. It was a good episode in aspects. Another thing I do want to mention is the prosthetics for Arno's hand. So if you watch episode 9, you know Arno basically gets his hand shot and it's really bad. In this episode, he has a stump now because obviously he has a hand amputated. It looks terrible. He just keeps it next to his chest the entire episode, and it's obviously a prosthetic. It looks so bad. Why they not put something like maybe what they did with every other character that has one hand in any show? They put a prop over to make it look like they've attached something so you can get away with them keeping their fist underneath, but it's obvious. Here's his fist underneath this little sleeve and it looks so bad. And the worst bit is he keeps it up next to his chest, so whenever you see him, it's literally in the centre of his mass, so it's not too hard. And you can't just not look at it. If they just kept his arm down, or maybe had his arm tucked in, we could have got away with the terrible prosthetic they used for his hand. I really didn't like that prosthetic. Another thing I didn't like is the treatment of Arno this episode. It's just like, they were like, okay, we're getting near the end of the season. We need to start wrapping up these stories and make the Strand thing. Because I know where Fear does their storytelling, they don't do an entire season. And I think episode 14 is the final Tower story. So we have 3 more episodes. And they still got all these other story arcs. So with all their filler they have had to put in, with all these other episodes like 9, 10... all of mid 7A, they do quite a lot in this episode, so you have good pacing. However, the story itself is shooting forwards because they're trying to wrap up all the Arno stuff so they can focus on only having 2 teams instead of this thirder. And they do set up one more thing, but I feel like that's definitely to Madison, not to Strand, so that's not connected. I feel that's a tease for Madison's return. But so they just straight up deal with Arno, finish off that story arc. I thought it was amazing. It was very brutal. It was cool. One of the best parts of this episode was that. However, thinking about it, it's annoying that this was connected to Daniel when it's meant to be this personal thing with Alicia. So I feel like they've taken something away from Alicia for Daniel to just wrap up this entire arc they have with Arno and everything like that, and they're like, we need to end all this, get this all sorted, and bring it in line with the main story. And I just didn't like how a side character did it when it's meant to be connected to Alicia, and it literally was just bam, done. It was okay, the overall pacing, and it made sense for the overall episode, but if you look at the grander episode, and like the grander thing, you're like, well, why did Daniel do that? Okay, I just liked it but didn't like it. There's a bit of a mixed mash. It's like, it's good in the episode, it's bad for the season. Now, I don't want to talk about the end, so be ready for spoilers, but before I go on to that, I do want to talk about Dwight, because at the start of this episode and the end of this episode, we hear about this gun run that's going on, and straight up I thought, okay, that would have been a cool episode to see. Why did we get like all this filler with 9, 10? Why did we not have one of those episodes be a Dwight episode where he goes out and finds guns? that would have been a cool episode. That's just a slight gripe that the story's happening off screen while we're getting all this filler. This is more about the season as a whole as an issue, so we get all this filler. And then the actual story, the progression towards Morgan and Alicia building an army is happening off screen, where Dwight's going to go do something, and we hear about it like, no, it'd been cool if we saw Dwight go off, find all these, like, weapons, and then we get the issue. Maybe there's, like, some drama there with maybe Anna's group or Strand's group finding it, and there'd be a little fight, and then that's the episode. That would have been a cooler episode 9 or 10 than what we got. It's just, we saw this, like, event, they could have shown us, and they didn't bother, which really annoyed me. But let's move on to the end of the episode. And this is one of the best endings we had, but also one of the worst. So there's two endings. So one ending is, this is like spoiler, so Wes is like, screw it, I'm gonna leave, because, you know, they have to ram West up there to be like, Wes is gonna do something. And then West, so he's a bit of a hypocrite. So he talks about how everyone sucks, everyone's rude, everyone's evil, basically. And then he goes off and becomes the most suckiest person alive by doing the thing. You're like, great, West. So you chastised Luciana for doing something, and then you go do something which is worse, in my opinion. But, like, it's just so annoying. I didn't like that. I thought that was stupid. And if he's trying to do a Eugene or something, no, can you not? I just thought it was a bit stupid. I just didn't like West at the end of this episode, and throughout this entire episode. Now let's talk about the main ending. And this ending is really great because it sets up so much. So this ending is when Luciana finds out, basically, the way Daniel works is that if he thinks Ofelia is alive, he can focus. He can get his abilities. And Luciana's like, okay, we need him, because apparently Daniel was the only one that has ever been able to fight Strand and beat him, when we can name off many other characters that have done that before. And so you have this really impactful moment where Luciana has to convince Daniel that Ophelia's still alive and she might be at the tower. And this sets up this moment where, okay, are one of these characters going to die? Because it goes, okay, if he's not, that will break Daniel. And I definitely believe, I don't think one of his characters are going to survive. I definitely think that Daniel is either going to kill himself or kill Luciana. And I'm leaning towards Luciana, to be honest, just because it seems like a thing Daniel would do. Like, he finds out he's been used one more time, and for this big thing, I definitely think he's going to turn around, snap, and Luciana's going to die. I definitely think this is a big setup for a big character death between one of these two, which will suck, because if we are losing Alicia this season, we are getting Madison back, which is cool, but then we're losing either Daniel or Luciana. Both these characters have been kind of stagnant since season 3, to be honest. Like, Luciana left the show. She literally left the story only to be shoehorned back in season 4. And so kind of Daniel. He got left the show and he got shoehorned back in season 5. So these are both characters that have been returned, and they're quite stagnant, so it'd be cool to see one of them die. Now let's move on to our 1 sense of 1 word overall review. And this episode has many negatives and many positives, but this is the first episode in a long time, in my opinion, that has more positives than negatives. I like that this episode is not filler, it is pure story, even if that story is going fast in the grand scheme of the season, but the pacing is great when it focuses on Daniel and Luciana. I like the Daniel and Luciana story, it's very cool. However, there are some downsides with it being just sudden, and how Daniel was meant to be paired with Charlie, and Daniel completely forgot about Charlie. I just realised that. Charlie disappears in the episode before. Daniel doesn't seem to care, he only cares about Luciana now. Yeah, that's a big issue. So you got that issue as well on top of that now. But there are some big issues. It looks kind of boring now, I don't have the green tint. Daniel is almost season 1, 2, 3 levels of good at points. Luciana does something great. I really like this episode just because Luciana actually does something for the first time since season 3. You can argue she had something to do with season 4. Season 5, she sat there in a room for half the season with a broken arm. Did nothing. Season 6, she did nothing. So I'm really happy Luciana had a big moment this episode. Even though it's a Daniel episode, it's a Daniel and Luciana episode. They share this episode. And I would have to say, this is a great episode. It's a lot of fun. I would recommend watching it. it's finally given characters you care about from before the reboot time and screen time. Like, they give Alicia a lot of screen time, but they kind of shafted Alicia with how bad they made her character. They have done the same with Luciana and Daniel, but they are on good form this episode, and I do recommend watching it. But please tell me down below, what do you think about this episode? Did you like it? Did you not? And what do you think about the ending? Do you think this is definitely setting up a big character death between one of these two characters? And what do you think about West's ending? And please tell me down below what your opinions are of this episode and everything. And if you want more content, content, look on the screen. If you want on the top right, that's the previous review. And by next week, top left will be the next review. But this is it for me today. If you want more content and be always up to date on The Walking Dead, feel free to subscribe. And I will see you at a later date. So goodbye, peace out, and I'll talk to you later.